Welcome to YourTown television program. My name is Jeff Kline, your host for the Naval Foundation sponsored segment, which we address and highlight different aspects of the Naval Postgraduate School, both its faculty, its students, its leadership, and its research opportunities. During this segment, we have a special guest, the chairman of our physics department, Dr. Kevin B. Smith, who's joining us. We'll talk a little bit about his responsibilities, but focus mainly on his research and the interesting things he does for our country and for the school and our students. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you.
Monterey County is a solid reputation for a diverse community, and we add to that in a lot of ways. So I like to start off each show with talking a little bit about you and where you come from. Are you from California originally?
No, I grew up in Central Florida. My family is actually from Kentucky, Tennessee area, so that's where I was born, originally raised. But when I was a kid, moved to Florida and grew up most of my young adult life in Central Florida.
So where did you get your doctorate?
I was at the University of Miami for that time. So I did my undergraduate work in Florida, went up northeast for a while, but decided to change venues and a little bit of what I was studying. And
well, now there's two University of Miami, so you'll have to define which one that was.
Yeah, it's the one in Florida.
Yes.
In the very, very humid place, yeah.
Yes, that's fantastic. Now, you, as we're going to discuss a little bit through this segment, you are an expert in acoustics. So how does one get interested in acoustics?
Well, I thought about that question some, and of course it depends, right? Depends on who you are and what your interests are. Some people get interested in studying acoustics through music. Other people see a need for it in the design of spaces, architectural spaces, architectural acoustics. Some people are interested in learning how either people or animals use acoustics. And of course the Navy's interested in acoustics because that's the way we communicate and information can be transmitted over long distances underwater. I came into acoustics more through the route of I was just studying physics. I was interested in some different types of physics. And by the time I got I needed to make a decision in my graduate career about what to study, I realized that I was missing the ocean, so I wanted to get back somewhere by the ocean. I've been on the coast ever since and studying underwater acoustics.
Well, you referred to that acoustics is important to the Navy, and you highlighted the communication aspect. What else is important, and why is the Navy so interested in acoustics?
Well, more than just communications. I mean, it's the only way information can really flow, and that's then everything. So how are you going to be able to observe anything? How are you going to understand what's going on? How do you touch that environment? How do you probe it? So because you can't transmit light waves through it, you can't transmit radio signals through it, you're really reliant on different senses, and sound is a great thing that transmits quite well underwater. And so that's been the natural thing that both animals have evolved into using, as well as what we realize we have to deal with when we operate underwater.
And the ocean is an extremely dynamic environment, so that the medium in which the acoustics actually pass through are quite different. So how closely do you work with our oceanographers?
Off and on, some on different projects. I certainly rely on both our oceanographers and at other institutions for helping characterize whatever particular environment we're trying to study at the time. Whether we're doing some modeling of that environment and we need good inputs, or we just need to know for deployment purposes what kind of conditions are we going to be dealing with there. What do we expect?
Now, you spent times in Scripps,
Yes.
Institute down in La Jolla, is that right?
Correct.
And what did you do there?
That was where I did my postdoctoral work. So I'd finished in Miami, and at the end of my time as a graduate student there, I'd started working on one of ONR's last funded deep ocean problems, which was a deep ocean reverberation.
Now, ONR is Office of Naval Research.
Office of Naval Research,
yeah,
correct.
That sponsors a lot of our research on campus.
Yes, and so back at the end of the Blue Water days, we were still studying deep ocean acoustic problems. And so I had started working on a project funded by the Office of Naval Research to study the reverberation from large features near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge.
So that's like sound bouncing off of something?
Sound bouncing off out in the middle of the Atlantic. You know, what happens to it? How does it get scattered around? What's that do in terms of trying to process and learn things about the environment from those signals? And when I was doing that at the end of my time in Miami, one of the lead institutions was Scripps for that experimental project. So they hired me on directly out of my PhD to then do some modeling and data analysis in support of that test.
So that was your dissertation, as we were doing that work for a while?
That was after my dissertation.
Oh, what did you do for your dissertation then?
My dissertation in Miami was based on more of a theoretical study of chaos in classical fields that are used in ocean science.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, that's pretty close. I mean, in some ways, the ocean can reflect that chaos, and in some cases, in my classroom as well. But that's,
right.
So how long were you in La Jolla? How long were you at Scripps?
2.5 years.
Okay. And then where did you go from there?
Well, at the end of a postdoc, as traditional academics do, you start looking for other places to work.
Right.
To get a real job.
Right.
And there was an opening here. It was actually, at the time, being managed by the Undersea Warfare Academic Group. And they had put out a search to bring in somebody in underwater acoustics, so it was a specific search for someone in that field, and came up and did some interviews and joined the faculty in January of '95.
Wow. Well, what attracted you about the postgraduate school?
Well, it's a beautiful area.
Sure, the Monterey County.
Monterey County is certainly a big
sure.
attraction
Right.
to be able to come up here. And I really enjoy the types of work that's available here, the types of research opportunities there are working for the Navy, especially in the field of underwater acoustics. It's a rich area to do research. And the students here are great students to work with. They're mature and they're interested, and they're going to ask good questions, and they're going to know why it is that you're studying this with respect to underwater acoustics.
In fact, do they ever challenge you, your faculty, in that way of saying, okay, this is nice theory, but how are we going to apply it? How are we going to use it?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And sometimes they come up and say, I've noticed this. Why can't we take advantage of this? And sometimes it's just hard to predict.
Well, that's great. Now, before we go and jump directly into your current research area, let's talk a little bit about the more boring side of your job, which is the administrative part of being a chairman of the physics department. How big is the physics department?
Let's see. Currently, I think we have on the order of about 30 people, but let's give or take about 5, because we're doing a lot of hiring right now.
Oh, that's great.
So we're regrowing the department. I think if we got up to full capacity, we'd be a department close to 35 to 40 people total.
Now, besides those students who are actually studying physics at NPS, does your faculty contribute to other curricula on campus?
Sure. I mean, the students that we have, that we work with as faculty in the classroom, come from different curricula across the campus. A lot of the students that we see in acoustics are either from the Combat Systems Science and Engineering curriculum or the Undersea Warfare curriculum.
Oh, I see. So those curriculum actually use, or you get the majority of what you teach and what you provide. In
the area of acoustics, yes.
Sure.
And then the department, the physics department itself, also supports the Space Systems Academic Group and some other groups on campus.
Well, that keeps you pretty busy then.
Yes.
As well as managing all the faculty associated with it.
Right.
Now, how long is that responsibility for?
I'm about 2 years into my first 3-year term, if I do it again. But we are it's been a lot of fun seeing the growth.
Right.
Rebuilding really from probably half our numbers at one point. So
now, the other thing I know you've done that's unique for faculty is you spent several years in Washington, D.C. As an NPS faculty member. So tell us, what were you doing in D.C. and why did you want to escape California? Well, don't worry about the second question first. That's the first one.
So I ended up actually initially wanting to do a 1-year sabbatical, and I had arranged for the sabbatical to be split half between Newport, the Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, Rhode Island, and the Dutch Naval Academy in Holland.
Which neither is near D.C., so this is going to be an interesting story.
So this is a long story. So I ended up turning my 1-year sabbatical into a 7-year time away from NPS.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so the first part of that sabbatical at Newport was such a professionally rewarding experience that I communicated with the leadership of both organizations and convinced them it'd be good for me to go back and stay there for a while longer. It was a great connection into the warfare centers and the kind of facilities they have and the personnel they have.
Now they have large laboratories.
Right.
They're always testing new things.
Right.
They're going to see a lot. I know that.
Yes.
They have very nice facilities, so I can understand why that's attractive.
Yeah, so that was a great experience. And at the end of that time when I went back there, I went there for 2 more years after my first year of sabbatical. I also learned another important lesson, which was you could fly from Providence Airport in the morning, be in D.C. by 8 o'clock, meetings all day long, and then fly
back
home in time for dinner.
Right.
And you can't do that from the West Coast.
No, you
So
can't.
again, I spoke to the leadership here and said, I think it would be worthwhile to spend some time in D.C. So they gave me some things to do for the administration, do some outreach, connect with some offices there, try to help establish a presence. The school was very interested in growing locally in the D.C. area some support for cyber activities. Mm-hmm. So that's not my field, but I kind of helped make some introductions.
Well, you better explain the cyber activities a little bit. So you're talking about short education courses or research side or actual cyber attacks against somebody?
No. A mix of the former. So
okay.
the education and research, providing that to government employees there in the D.C. area. So that was sort of part of my motivation. And I also did my own research, continued my own research, and had good access to the Office of Naval Research and other agencies, curriculum sponsors at NAVC at the Navy Yard. So it was a good opportunity to go and meet some people face to face and build up some opportunities so that when I came back, which I eventually did, I was in a good place to build some research programs here.
Well, now did you ever make it to the Dutch
I did. So that was that was just in my first year. I did 6 months in Newport, 6 months in Holland, and then came back to Newport for 2 more years.
So during that sabbatical, did you make contacts that as beneficial to the students as well as yourself for future research areas at Newark?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
What I've been able to bring here to the school for our students to be involved in terms of thesis research, as well as the connections we still maintain and are growing connections at the warfare centers with our distance learning programs, that actually grew out of the time that I started back there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was very beneficial, especially for me, having come through the traditional academic route of college, postdoc, faculty position. I had no operational time. I never spent any time active duty. So I wanted to get into those places where I could learn about the real operational side.
Sure. And now DC is not the only place where we have outreach offices as well. Do we have other places where we reach out and to the fleet and that sort of thing?
Yes, we have some other offices, and their functions are a little different depending on where they are and their size and how they're managed. But there are some offices in San Diego, I believe up in Bangor, Washington, in Norfolk, Virginia. Some are really just small single-room spaces that can provide VTC to some locals there.
So they support our distance learning program.
It supports distance learning in different locations.
So
yes.
and now that you remind me, I'm aware I'm going to have a future show on distance learning programs because that's fascinating as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But now let's shift to your current research, because you are combining the acoustics background that you have with the need to communicate and unmanned systems. So tell us a little bit about what cutting edge stuff you're doing.
Well, most of my work sort of revolves around understanding the acoustic propagation, understanding how sound propagates through the ocean well enough that we could try to take advantage of features in that signal or predict what would happen under certain situations, studies of what the ambient noise field looks like, how does that change, because there are new sensors available that weren't available, or at least not easily available before, and the Navy's starting to utilize those quite a bit, as are other countries, and so we want to get a good understanding of how are these sensors going to perform in ocean environments.
So what do you do with our, well, first describe what our wave gliders are and how do you use them, and by the way, where did we get them?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer all those questions.
Yeah, sure.
So the platforms I've been working with, I have 2 different types, although the school as a whole has many autonomous system platforms. And the 2 that I have, one is a wave glider made by Liquid Robotics up in Sunnyvale, California. And it is a very interesting design that basically provides perpetual motion by taking advantage of some mechanical energy in the water itself, in the ocean itself. And the way it does that is there's a float on top, a part of the system that floats on the top of the water and has solar panels so it can collect the energy. And that recharges a battery that runs the CPU, so it's got its brains powered. And then through an umbilical about 6 meters down, there are some basically blades that can rotate on cantilevers. And as the surface unit is pulled up and down by the surface waves, the lower unit is forced up and down through water that's not moving as much as it is on the surface. 6 meters down, the water is more still. And
so as it goes there, actually propelling itself through the water.
That propels it, and so it will just go simply by that mechanical motion. None of the electrical energy it's storing in its battery is used for its propulsion. So it's very persistent. It will just sort of go and go and go, not very fast, but it'll just keep going. They've actually had these cross entire oceans multiple times. They've accomplished this. So they're very persistent platforms, and for us they become trucks in the ocean that we can park either sensors inside or we can deploy sensors from. We can try to use them as communication gateways if something's going to communicate underwater, but then also be able to communicate through radio or some type of antenna through the air.
And we can survey ocean conditions as well,
right,
in order to get a good assessment of the environment.
Right, exactly.
Okay. And you're using those as the platform for some of your research material as well, is that right? Or?
Yes, I mean, my focus with those platforms has been on utilizing them as to track submerged systems, either gliders themselves or drifters, but something that's submerged, and and it may be able to move around. So how would you keep track of where it was if it stayed submerged? That's what I've been using these for.
And how do they actually steer themselves? I know going back and forth, but how do they turn left or right when they need to follow some sort of course?
Right. The wave gliders do have a rudder on that subunit, so it will turn the rudder, and it has a magnetic heading, so it knows its direction. Other types of systems that I've also used are more the traditional underwater gliders, which basically use a buoyancy engine and just yo-yo up and down through the water column.
Now, how do they maintain their position in the ocean, or do they move using the same type of water pressure as the waves go up and down?
Mm-hmm. They are really just perpetually gliding, and so they're either heavier than water or lighter than water.
Okay.
And they have a buoyancy engine that they change the size of to make it either heavier or lighter.
Well, that's just like fish in some cases.
Right, yeah, something like that. And so it can pitch its nose down or pitch it up, and then it'll basically just do a yo-yo pattern, as we call it, through the water column.
Well, Dr. Smith, thank you very much for joining us today on the YourTown television program. I hope you've enjoyed this segment where we've learned a little bit more about our physics department and the interesting research they're doing, and most important, that the opportunities they're providing for our students and officers as they come here to get a graduate education and apply their education toward interesting problems that our Navy has today. I hope you stay tuned for future segments. We'll be featuring some of our students and what they do at MPS as well. Dr. Smith, thank you again.
All right, thank you.